Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 32nd lecture of the day. We'll start very shortly. And good evening to all our viewers and all our participants. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we'll have Pritikana Karmakar's session, and we'll start very soon. Just waiting for some viewers to join. This is a 32nd lecture organized by Calcutta Comparatists 1919, and a very warm welcome to you all. Our student Duti will read the introduction of the Calcutta Comparatist. She will start soon. Thank you, participants, for joining us today.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the team Calcutta Comparatists 1919, I have been granted the honor to welcome you to today's webinar. Calcutta Comparatists 1919 is an independent forum for research scholars of humanities and social sciences. It carries the legacy of academic space for literary comparison between Indian languages, initiated in 1919 as envisioned by Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee and introduced at the University of Calcutta. It is the platform for sharing and discussing research interests and ideas. We are organizing online lectures on various interdisciplinary topics to be delivered by academicians and distinguished research scholars of different fields. Your remarkable skills, insights, and knowledge will be a valuable addition to your team. We look forward to a mutually beneficial relationship with everyone in this horizon. The topic for today's discussion is the day after the disease, preparability, trauma, and identity in the epidemic continuum. Thank you for joining us today. Now, I would like to welcome our PhD scholar, Aratrika Ganguly, to formally welcome and introduce us to today's speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Duti. Thank you for this lovely introduction. A very good evening to all of you, and especially to our speaker of the day, Pritikana Karmakar. I will now introduce the speaker. Pritikana Karmakar is a PhD scholar in English at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences in IIT Roorkee. She has done a Bachelor's of Arts in English from MUC Women's College affiliated to the University of Vadwan. She has acquired a master's degree in English from the University of Hyderabad. She has had professional experience as a marketing content writer and academic content editor in the edtech sector. Her research interests include medical humanities, post-colonial literature, gender studies, and media studies. As Dutish said, Pritikana will be talking on her topic of the day is the day after the disease, prepareability, trauma, and identity in the epidemic continuum. As you know, living in this pandemic situation, it's a I genuinely believe it's a very perfect topic from today's age, for today's contemporary for our period. And now I welcome Pritikana for the lecture. Pritikana, over to you, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Aratikadi. Uh, Good evening to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank Calcutta Comparatists 1919 for giving me this opportunity to present my research ideas amid such an academic platform. I especially acknowledge my thanks to Jemima, my one-time classmate during undergraduation, for introducing me to this forum. And last but not the least, to each one among the audience for listening to me today. I hope you all are doing well uh, and staying safe, especially given the times. Uh, so, moving on to my topic, it is on epidemics. Uh, my interest in examining epidemiological narratives has come from not only, as many would assume, from the current situation, but from my interest in dystopic worlds such as that of the Andromeda strain, Contagion, The Seventh Seal, 10 Cloverfield Lane, 12 Monkeys, The Day the Earth Stood Still, all Hollywood blockbusters, and many, many more. My interest in epidemiology at the juncture of cultural and human rights studies uh, and literature was encouraged by my interactions with Professor Pramod K. Nayar during my post graduation at the University of Hyderabad. Our discussions on Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go, a dystopia about a community of human clones, especially that of the rebuilding of our species and their memory and human dignity during medical crisis, has guided me significantly in this area, in this research endeavor as well. The final impetus was served by my enrollment in a course at Harvard X, Lessons from Ebola, where some of the world's leading epidemiological experts and prominent personas who led the battle against Ebola's most recent ravages in Western Africa shared their experiences and thoughts regarding the fatal epidemic. It was a huge eye opener in many ways, for it made me aware of how wide range the politics encompassing epidemiology is. I hope that our discussions today can be food for thought for all of us, given how relatable it is with the times. Now, I would like to explain certain terms or concepts relevant to my area of research, for these will be mentioned very frequently. Um, so, the first one is epidemic. Uh, it means a widespread occurrence of an infectious disease in a community at a particular time. And it comes from the Greek word epidemia, which means prevalence of disease. My second term is pandemic, which is a disease prevalent over a whole country or the world. A third, pathogen, which is a bacterium, virus, or other microorganisms that can cause a disease. In the context of my research, this term can alternatively stand for anything that invades a body or a structure from the outside and alters the state of said body. Epidemiology is the branch of medicine which deals with the incidence, distribution, and possible control of disease and other factors relating to health. A vector is an organism, typically a biting insect or a lick or any other domestic animal that transmits a disease or parasite from one animal or plant to another, plainly speaking, a carrier. Emergence is a phenomenon or process of infections appearing within a population or those whose incidence or geographic range is rapidly increasing or threatens to increase in the near future following its introduction into a new host. This new host is very important because that is what differentiates it from my next term, which is re-emergence. Re-emergence is almost the same as emergence, except that uh, in the case of re-emergence, the infections threaten to increase following its emergence in an existing host because of some ecological disruption. An outbreak is the occurrence of disease cases in excess of normal expectancy. Spillover. This is a term that has been used very often in terms of diseases, and especially in my readings of David Quammen's book, The Spillover. It has been defined as um, the moment when a pathogen passes from members of one species as host into the members of another. It is a very focused event. Now, I would like to also differentiate between linear versus cycle versus continuum models of epidemic. So, the model of epidemic in which the epidemic is described as progressing from one stage to another in a single series of steps is a linear model, as opposed to a cyclical model where the events in the epidemic are regularly repeated in the same order, and a continuum, which is my area of focus, is uh, something uh, which is continuous, as in the events are not discrete. It is a continuous traveling from one stage to another. I shouldn't say exactly there are stages, because that is what I'm hoping to avoid. So it suffuses into the lives, into the structure of our daily existence. The next term is biosafety. The biosafety is the prevention of loss of biological integrity, and such mechanisms include the conduction of regular reviews of the protective measures in laboratory settings, as well as strict guidelines that ensure the following of such mechanisms. Biosecurity, it is almost similar to biosafety, except that there is agency, threat, and accountability involved. That is, it is not a matter of natural or accidental events. Uh, Now, I would like to give you an introduction into what my research exactly is going to follow. So, Charles Rosenberg defines the epidemic as an event, its public character as a social phenomenon with the dramaturgy of 5 stages from its identification to its containment through successive waxing and waning of tension and crisis. However, this formulaic plot of the epidemic narrative silences the epidemiological narratives that go beyond the plot, beyond the dramatic rendition of a chain or cycle of arbitrary disasters or of battles with nature interspersed with localized victories. Such narratives, instantiated in works such as A Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe, The Plague by Albert Camus, The Stand by Stephen King, and The Pestilence by Frank Thierry, provide a different scope of the epidemic, that is, a manifestation of greater ecological and psychosocial phenomena whose effects far surpass casualty figures and temporary triumphs, a continuum of hauntedness. So, what I intend to is mostly a textual analysis of these texts, and substantiated by some archival studies, so that I can examine these unattended narratives of the epidemic vis-a-vis the individual and the socio-political responses, the changes in the structure of the global health narrative, and their consequences on the larger domain of the social narrative. Now, I would like to give you a brief introduction into some of the texts that I have chosen. The thing is, my research is currently in a very nascent stage. I have barely joined some months ago, and so the texts are yet to be finalized, but I have a couple of texts in mind which can help substantiate my arguments and questions too. So the first among them is The Plague by Albert Camus. It's a novel published in 1947 that tells the story from the point of view of a narrator of a fictional plague sweeping the French Algerian city of Oran. The novel starts with an infestation of rats, a huge number of rats in Oran, which are dying in the streets. And Dr. Bernard Rieu and his colleagues say that a plague is sweeping through the town. Mm, as usual, there is some downplaying of the situation by the authorities, and there are a sudden escalation in cases and deaths, um, make the authority, a little bit more aware. And suddenly there is a lot of rush to get the homes quarantined, corpses strictly supervised, and the town sealed. So the plot moves through several points of views, including that of a journalist, a smuggler, a father of a church, and so in the juxtaposition of religion, ethics and effects of vaccine texts, smuggling, uncountable deaths, and exile, the plague ultimately stops, and it does end on an optimistic note, but with a chilling warning. Um, the end note of the novel is, and indeed, as he, that is Bernard Rooks, listened to the cries of joy rising from the town, Reeves remembered that such joy is always imperiled. He knew what those jubilant crowds did not know, but could have learned from books, that the plague bacillus never dies or disappears for good, that it can lie dormant for years and years in furniture and linen chests, and that it abides its time in bedrooms, cellars, trunks, and bookshelves, and that perhaps the day would come when, for the bane and the enlightening of men, it would rouse up its rats again and send them forth to die in a happy city. Very pessimistic ending for a supposedly optimistic novel. My second text is The Stand by Stephen King. Stephen King has always been a very favorite of mine, not just for his films, but also for his novels. And though they are very long, but they are amazing. Um, in fact, I would I would encourage everyone in my audience, if they have already haven't, to sample some of his texts, especially the Dark Tower series. So in The Stand, a deadly virus called superflu or Captain Trips, engineered as an advanced biological weapon by the government, is accidentally released from a lab across America, actually from the Center of Control of Diseases, that is CDC, um, across America and the world, causing 99.4% of the entire world's population to die. The 0.6% who survive struggle to find an existence and rebuild their lives in the aftermath of the plague. They all dream about two opposing figures, Randall Flagg, the Dark Man, and Mother Abigail, who is receiving visions from God. The survivors split into two factions, one led by Flagg and one led by Mother Abigail, and prepare for the final stand between good and evil. My next text is The Scarlet Plague, written by Jack London. The Scarlet Plague follows a professor born before the plague wiped out most of humanity. So the events of the plague is in the year 1913, and the world that is talked about is some 60 years later. I'm so sorry. The world that is being talked about in the plague is 2013, and later, when after the plague has ended, it is 2073. So so the plague has wiped out most of the humanity, and the professor attempts to instill old knowledge, the knowledge of his generation, to one of his grandsons born into the new, ignorant, and primitive world. London is interested partly in the mysteries of the microorganic world and partly in a critique of the modern social structure. Um, for the author, the destruction that follows his plague is both to be welcomed and despised. because it is to be welcomed because it breaks down social barriers and makes everyone equal. But it is also despised for obvious reasons because the death count is too high and civilization breaks down. So, such total destruction forces, as I said, the class barriers to be broken down, and the civilization that it has ruined uh, evolves into another vision of the society. The young characters in the book are very violent with one another. They're very primitive, and they're eager to be the dominant members of the clans. Um, Society, it seems that it is not better the second time around. So, if we consider the epidemic as a scourge, the hand of God, what kind of future does it bring? The only hope lies in one boy who is more tender and considerate than his brothers. My fourth text is The Companions by Katie M. Flynn. It is a debut novel which came out in 2020 and I think sometime in March. So, set in a slightly futuristic quarantined California, Flynn's debut novel opens up after a devastating virus has decimated a huge chunk of the population. Borders are closed, cities are under surveillance, and death is no longer black and white. Metis MedTech Corporation has the ownership of all companions or machines the dying can upload their consciousness into. So it is like this artificial intelligence world where you can upload your consciousness into a machine, and the machine can be put into another body, and you can buy it. Um, it, him, them, whatever you can call them. Um, so this Metis, the MedTech Corporation, has ownership of all the companions or the machines. The companions can either be wards of their families or sold to strangers, but they are all denied basic human rights. Spanning decades and continents, the novel is told from the perspectives of 8 characters, especially that of Lilac, who is the protagonist of the story, a companion who is unlike the rest. For she is the first one to break out of the control of the machines. And she says, it's not supposed to be possible for a companion to dream, but I can feel it like a lozenge on the tongue, both present and disappearing all at once. Uh, the novel raises important questions about humanity, and like Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go, uh, if clones, if companions have memories and can feel emotions like love, pain, anger, and sadness, are they not human? If not, what makes them human in the first place? What makes us human in the first place? And the fifth text that I have taken is a graphic novel. It is also a very recent one, um, created by Hollywood big names such as Frank Thierry and Oleg Obukov. Um, it is set in the late 14th century when the Great Pestilence, the Black Death, one of the worst, uh, if not the worst, epidemics ever in the history of humankind, is sweeping across Europe, killing millions of people. But what the creators of Pestilence have done is, instead of giving a scientific explanation for the Black Death, they give us a zombie version. What if, in reality, this is no straightforward plague, but the first non-recorded zombie infestation of man? Ex-Crusader Roderick Helms and his fellow agents in the church, Fiat Lux, must seek out the cause of this undead outbreak and vanquish it before mankind ceases to exist. Now that I have outlined most of the texts, my primary texts that I am thinking of following, now I would point out certain questions have that that are the building blocks of my research. So these are my observations mostly. Like I said, my research is still in a very nascent stage. So I'm still reading and I'm noting down my observations, and having collected them, I would like to present them in front of you, hoping that you among the audience there would be some from the audience there would be some interest and some guidance also. um, so the first thing that I would like to examine is whether and whether the entire dramaturgy of an epidemic consists of a single beginning, middle, and end, as Rosenberg suggests in his essay, What is an Epidemic? Charles Rosenberg is one of the leading epidemiologists of the 20th century, and in his essay, What is an Epidemic? He talks about the episodic quality of the epidemic. Uh, he opines that epidemics start at a moment in time, proceed on a stage limited in space and duration, followed by a plot line of increasing and revelatory tension, move to a crisis of individual and collective character, then drift towards closure. Now, the epidemic does begin at a point, but how do we define it? Now, pathologically speaking, does it start with the patient zero, the perfect vector, the perfect mutation, or the perfect ecological disruption that brings in the mutation? So, the concept of patient zero is a very problematic one. Um, it is almost like people want to blame a certain people. Although some people have said that identifying the patient zero uh, is of great importance, because then the webs of the traveling epidemic can be ascertained, and to a certain extent it does help. But most scientists, most epidemiologists, what they believe is there is nothing called the patient zero, because by the time we actually identify a patient zero, it is actually the middle of it, not exactly the beginning. And so the patient zero lies on a total geography of blame, as Paul Farmer puts it. uh, and as for the perfect storm, that is also another concept that is often brought in terms of within while talking about epidemics, uh, that the perfect storm, which is uh, how do I put this, and a bad situation that is caused by a combination of various unfortunate circumstances, uh, as if it is happenstance that everything bad came together at one point and uh, erupted. Uh, now, Susan Sontag uh, argues against the excess of metaphor in describing illness. Uh, so, in that case, do the notions of randomness and volatility produced by the concept of epidemic as a perfect storm oppose and consequently perpetuate the course of human actions or lack thereof? Um, Now, with respect to these observations, I would like to point certain things out, some facts. In August 1994, Mark Preston, a young farmer in Mackay, Australia, was infected with a rare and deadly Hendra virus. And the virus, as David Quammen says in the spillover, had attacked once, subsided, lingered in latent form for a year, and then reared up and killed him. In the following year, something which was rare and unprecedented in the history of epidemics. The disease had struck a young veterinarian in Cairns uh, almost a decade later, and while she survived the attack, there was this constant fear of a relapse, a constant uncertainty of what next. The next instance that I'm going to talk about is something which we as Indians can relate a lot, I think. December 2019, if anyone has observed, marked the 40th year of the World Health Organization's declaration of the eradication of smallpox. And yet, the turn of the millennium brought forth an increase in the anxieties simmering over its comeback, either as an agent of biowarfare or a consequence of the melting of the polar permafrost. Again, there are various different ideas regarding that. Some of the scientists have completely, uh, you know, said that this is not possible at all, while other scientists have said that it could be possible. Now, just days before WHO could declare an end to the Ebola outbreak that had been ravaging in the eastern Congo since August 2018, a new case emerged on April 10, 2020, forcing the Ebola response team to continue being on high alert till the end, according to the Washington Post. Infectious microbes have indeed taught us that their will and ability to survive, as Molly Caldwell Crosby says in The Great American Plague, uh, to survive may be stronger than ours. That instead of imagining the human's fear being contaminated by the calamitous viruses, we can visualize human beings within a colossal virosphere, one whose radius is being slowly revealed. The number of viruses far outnumber the number of human beings, and the number of emerging events of viruses within a very short span of time, within 30 years, is around 300, which is a huge number. If every single one of those emergent diseases have the capability of becoming epidemics, then where would the human population be? And coming back to the idea of the colossal virosphere, uh, this is why the end of the epidemic anticipates the next big one. So, big one is what we call pandemics, actually. From this viewpoint, the gaps in between two big ones constitute the epidemiological kairos, the opportune moments for human intervention, signifying the prepareability of the human race against such diseases, which may ensure how close the victory would be. It could also be the time taken to convert the legendary memory of a real calamity into the general undeniability of the fantastically unreal. So, we in defining epidemiological kairos, I would uh, I would like to explain it in two ways. One would be if you consider the beginning of an epidemic, like uh, if you are aware that certain diseases may be emerging, and what is our ability to prepare for certain diseases in terms of as Paul Farmer, medical historian, says, stuff, space, and systems. Um, so that is a part of the opportunities that we have, the opportune moments that we have, And we can also take it as something after the epidemic, uh, a, a resultant, you know, uh, way of a resultant way of atoning, I should say, for not preparing enough against an epidemic. And well, if there is enough time between two big ones, then it can also become a memory, a legend, as most of the countries have forgotten how to deal with outbreaks and epidemics. We have found this situation very to be very familiar during these times. Uh, Also, this particular time can also be taken as the time when there is a pathological metamorphosis of all that the epidemic leaves in its wake, from the disruption of the infrastructures of the society to the failure of the individual and the collective biosafety into what we can call the epidemic continuum. So, what I intend to examine is this all inclusive uh, understanding of this avatar of the epidemic, one that does not follow the notion of a chain of arbitrary disasters, uh, but something which is not just a bad dream that passes away, as Albert Camus says in The Plague, but the transformation of one bad dream to another. As for the ending, does the epidemic truly end? Fears of smallpox coming back, as I've already mentioned, the trauma of an encroachment from within and without, and the defamiliarization of the known world. Uh, Everything has changed in the last 8 months in this country. Uh, and if that is not a defamiliarization of epic scale, I don't know what is. There are indelible fears and biases, and the continuation of being hunted and haunted. So, how does the epidemic truly end? On the pathological level, the concepts of emergence and spillover of diseases are a significant driving agent of the idea of the epidemic continuum. The idea of hundreds of emerging infectious diseases lying in waiting for the perfect host, the perfect amplifier, and the perfect catalyst for an outbreak in the form of an ecological disturbance is in tandem with the notion of the epidemic as something more than just an arbitrary killer. It is not your daily Jack the Ripper with a similar or different modus operandi, depending on the disease. Uh, Additionally, the possibility of older diseases coming back and the existing ones that are nowhere close to being eradicated continuously force us to restructure our medical practices, making the notion of endings an empirical improbability. And and I have found most of the epidemiological narratives, uh, whether it is for a dramatic effect or not, they always talk about endings, yes, but there is always something lurking in the background too, something which uh, forces us to think the whether the epidemic or the event has really ended. So in The Stand, Stephen King says, "Life is such a wheel that no man could stand upon it for long, and it always, at the end, came round to the same place again." And Stephen King also says in The Stand that uh, where did the plague come from? Where did the super flu come from? And then somebody answers back, a character answers back, "I think it was always here," which is in line with Albert Camus' sentiments in The Plague. Uh, the plague is life, he says. And in the same way, Jack London also says, all the world is topsy-turvy, and it has been topsy-turvy ever since the plague. So even if the pathogen has left or has been weakened, it does not really leave our systems. It stays on. It stays on as a memory. It stays on in the structures that it has disrupted. And so I think that the continuum model is a better model for understanding epidemics rather than any linear or cyclical models. My second observation is, how do the epidemiological Kairos and Kronos manifest, and what illuminations on the concepts of biosafety, biosecurity, and biological metrics of dignity does it produce? Kairos stands for opportune time, while Kronos for sequential or chronological time. The epidemiological Kairos is marked by prepareability, the strengthening of what we call biosafety and biosecurity, and the possible foretelling of disasters. On the other hand, it can also be marked by inaction, the time taken to forget a real calamity, uh, and the time taken from it's just scare talk to someone made a mistake, now they're trying to cover it up. This is also a part of Kairos. The Kairos is the result of Kronos and sometimes the cause as well. The epidemiological Kronos entails the breakdown of Kairos. The precariousness of the body with respect to the world tips over the edge. On an individual level, the illusion of biosafety is thwarted for a single moment and is gone forever. Uh, there are similarities with Jean Amory's idea of the violation of human dignity in his memoir on torture. Uh, Biosafety is merely a performative aspect of the biosphere, and it is as precarious as human dignity and barely existing. It is not just the trauma of the physiological boundaries being invaded or the resultant pathological suffering, but also of the succeeding similar actions that are supposed to be more benign, life saving, and necessary to submit to, sometimes more painful than the effects of the disease itself. Hence appears the crippling fear of needles and countless pills, confined spaces, strangers in hazmat suits, community condemnation, and the possibility of the inevitable. Furthermore, the situations of quarantine and social distancing could be considered similar to that of a solitary confinement of prisoners, and to the essence of uh, the human as a social being. It is as if the world is topsy-turvy, as Jack London has said in the Scarlet Plague. The defamiliarization whose effects may be as long lasting as any other form of post traumatic stress disorder. Now, in an age where we have become so conscious of the barriers between the person and the world, the silent intrusion of the pathogen breaks the reciprocity of trust in others as much as in their own body. It is exacerbated. It is exacerbated by the fact that the primary culpability, that is against the pathogen, is barely of importance. And now I want to examine whether this is why we shift to newer geographies of blame. Now, we can't, even if we know that there is a silent intruder into our body, there is a virus, there is a bacteria, we can hardly take up arms against it, or uh, go for revenge. So, how do we exactly negotiate this? Uh, uh, that is my next question. How does the epidemic become a source of othering? There are two opposing forces in terror management theory, namely coalitional psychology, which involves seeking comfort in groups, and mortality salience, which involves activities driven by the fear of death, which may give rise to this othering in case of epidemics. In the novels that I have taken up, there is this grouping of people into two or more factions. So people of a similar mind will come together and they will try to blame the other groups, the other group, and there will be, of course, a fight against them in terms of there could be a social conflict, there could be a physical conflict also, and almost two-thirds of the plot in both the Stand and the Scarlet Plague is about uh, clan violence, group violence. So, what exactly is pathological in this case? The disease or the discrimination? The condition of he was my friend. So there is this part when the in the graphic novel Pestilence, where uh, the protagonist, he meets a zombie and he recognizes him as his previous friend, and and his realization is abrupt that now that person is not the same person anymore. He's a man who hunts him. This is a very common occurrence in case of large scale epidemics. Can the idea of leaky bodies or bodies without boundaries be another reason for the othering? So here we see that there are clearly two groups, one who is the infected and one who is not. So the ones who are infected are the bodies with defect, and bodies that can possibly pass on impairment, which result in the fear for biological integrity of the self. And nothing scares people more than that, which even causes people to take up arms, sometimes very logically. On the social level, no matter the dimension of the community involved, the first infection and the first death have a similar impact, giving rise to what Daniel Defoe calls the precipitant disposition of our people in the Journal of the Plague Year. That no one is safe becomes the mood of the community as much as we all realize our fellowship with the defeated. It exacerbates once the outbreak causes the dissolution of the social structures such as economy or communal harmony. Alternatively, it is also this mood which creates a pandemic of fear and discriminations, a soft bigotry of low expectations that stays long after the epidemic is gone. For instance, the yellow fever became the grounds for racial discrimination against the blacks in America, as much as AIDS stands for a similar bias against male homosexuality, not to mention the Black Death, which became one of the major factors for radical social change in the 14th century Europe. We can trace these kind of groups where there is a lot of discrimination and taking up arms in the text that I've chosen. Humans and zombies, this is a very obvious distinction in Frank Thierry's Pestilence. African slaves and white masters in yellow fever during the Great American Plague, and homosexuality, rampant sexuality, promiscuity, which was discriminated against during AIDS, as I've already pointed out. The fractions of belief in life and rehabilitation in the Stand, as I've pointed out, the two groups led by Mother Abigail and the other by Randall Flagg. Those with memory versus those who lack it. In the Scarlet Plague, now the single one with a memory is the professor, and he condemns the new world as primitive, as having none of the humanity that he has seen in his generation before the plague occurred. And in the companions, perhaps this particular discrimination is very toxic. Humans versus a new slave species. Uh, the companions, they are nothing more than entertainment for the generation after the plague, the generation that survives. So this is how the othering takes place, and I want to examine how this comes into being. Uh, Apart from this, I would also like to examine how identity can be defined in the ever increasing scope of the virosphere. Even though Darwin's theory of evolution had contested the biblical idea of man as the crown of creation, it has also produced an alternative for the same idea. It is bringing human beings down, but it also talks about man as the most favored race in the struggle for life. Such sentiments often lead to non accounting of the scope of the biosphere, the ignorance of perpetual absurd. Everybody knows that pestilences have a way of recurring in the world, yet somehow we find it hard to believe in ones that crash down on our heads from a blue sky. There have been as many plagues as wars in history, yet always plagues and wars take people equally by surprise, is what Albert Camus talks about in his novel. Infectious microbes have indeed taught us that they can survive longer than us. So instead, uh, as I've already talked about, imagining the humans within a virosphere, how does this end in a loss of power, a sense of loss of power for the human beings? And how do we negotiate with this loss of power? Is it through the othering, by treating the victims as homosecars to the calamity, where they are reduced to numbers only? Or through the geography of blame, as seen in the hunt for the patient zero, along with terms such as suspect and disease detective? It is almost like a collective hunt uh, for to blame, collective war, a collective uh, a movement of blaming is what goes on. Uh, so this anxiety of disappearance of the human beings, the human species, the redundancy of our bodies, and the transmission of memory to reinforce the idea of the human are important parts of species rebuilding during and after the epidemic. Are we then becoming or creating new races or species with a genetic memory? One of the characters, Glenn, in The Stand by Stephen King, says, I also have certain theories which I have written down and hope to prove or disprove. I don't believe that man arising from the ashes of the superflu is going to be anything like the man arising from the cradle of the Nile with a bone in his nose and a woman by the hair. That's one of the theories. Uh, so, are we then creating new species? Is uh, is the epidemic an evolutionary step in our racial memory? Are we granting equal dignity to every aspect of that, or is it selective in nature to perpetuate power play? As we have already seen how the othering takes place, perhaps the perpetuation of power play is one of the important aspects that I would like to examine. In that case, the epidemic, uh, the epidemic narratives can we consider them deformative Bildungsroma, as we see in The Stand, the Scarlet Plague, the Companions, and so forth, where there is no singular build up of character, but a character getting enmeshed within the complexities of society, the negative aspects of society. Um and with this, with these questions and with these observations, I would like to end my lecture. Like to engage, and I would also like to uh, ask the audience if there are any questions, if there are any observations, and please let me know.
Thank you so much, Pritikana. It was a wonderful presentation. We have some comments. I am making them visible. This comment is from Protein Dash, one of our founder members. Excellent observations. Pandemic has been used as a tool for discrimination, and othering has formed the basis of labeling the vulnerable minorities.
Yes, it is very, very true. As we have often seen in several epidemics throughout the ages, it just forms a basis for othering. I mean, in case of the yellow fever, it was very ridiculous, and yet for that age, it was very apt. So the yellow fever is said to have traveled from Africa, and the slave bearing ships that traveled to South America, the southern states of America, uh, they uh, they blamed the slaves from bringing it in, and their theory was um the mm, the African slaves, the Afro Americans, consequently, they would have no trouble with the yellow fever. They would not be affected, but they are bringing this plague upon the white Americans, and that was the basis of the othering. So
Okay,
it
yeah. Yes, yes.
and so we also saw this in case of AIDS. Uh, AIDS, that this is a disease that can happen to practically anyone with who is not being careful, and somehow it just got into homosexuality. Somehow it became a way of policing people with who are supposed to be promiscuous with their sexual liaisons, and especially targeting homosexuals. uh, so yeah.
Thank you. Protein has another comment. Here it is. In case of COVID-19, also there has been a time when in India people expressed the same attitude towards the housemaids and other people from margin, accused them for bad hygiene, which marks the point of othering.
Yes, of course. And I would also like to point out that there was a certain time when the working class communities were brought in from the other states, and people said that that was the time when the cases increased, and it is because of bringing the workers in from the other states is the why the the cases increased, and not because the lockdown was over.
Okay, Protein has a question too. He writes, do you think this process of othering also created this mass xenophobia among migrant workers during COVID-19?
uh, to a certain extent, yes. I'm not so sure that it is that easy to think about it in those terms also. Uh, mm, I Mass xenophobia in the sense that when you talk about migrant workers, uh, they are actually people from our state itself, isn't it? As in, is what we are talking about. They are being brought in. So I'm not sure whether it is xenophobia though. But yeah, there is a lot of othering. Yes, very much so.
Thank you. Jemima has a question. Jemima writes, it was an interesting lecture. Thank you so much. You have included Stephen King's stand in your research. My question is how human beings respond to evil in this novel.
Thank you, Jemima, for this question.
And there is an add-on. Okay. And if you would like to discuss about the vulnerability of human beings in their encounter with the evil forces that is shown in the novel.
Okay, so there are two parts to it, of course. This Randall Flagg, this character, uh, he is shown to be an absolute evil character, absolute evil, as if he's the incarnation of Satan, as opposed to Mother Abigail, who is almost like this Moses character. She's getting visions from God, she's getting messages from God in order to bring the people under her, around her, to safety. And Randall Flagg, he, to a certain extent, there is there is a lot of ambiguity uh, whenever, I mean, this satanic kind of discourses occur in literature. There it can be taken in both ways, as in he also is a leader. He attracts more followers, and but he doesn't take care of them, so to speak. uh, on the other hand, Mother Abigail, she has very few followers, and somehow, I mean, she is not very particularly caring either, but she has this presence, she has this calming effect, and she has religion on her side, although it is failing. Uh, Whereas Randall Flagg, he has chaos on his side. He has the power of, he has the power. He has physical power. He has the power of masses. Uh, he has all those things that can attract attract people, money, resources, and everything. Which is how he keeps on attracting more and more people to his side. But I'm not sure whether Stephen King intends to show that evil is defeated by Mother Abigail, because he kind of continues also, and in the next book also he creates a lot of chaos. So evil remains as a counterpoint to good. And as for the vulnerability of human beings in their encounter with evil forces, okay, so there is a lot of there are quite a few characters under Randall Flagg whose thoughts are sometimes shown, as well as people under Mother Abigail, who are also, who can also hear the voice of Randall Flagg, who can also uh, see the visions that he is putting into their mind. And both are equally I mean, susceptible, I can say. It is personal, it is more like personal, uh, uh, you know uh, personal motivations that keep people on the sides, on the two sides. I don't think it has anything to do with what is good, what the people think is good or should be done. It is mostly what, so it is like you have your family on the side of you are on the side of Mother Abigail. Your family is also on the side of Mother Abigail, and you will try most of your friends to also be there on the side of Mother Abigail, rather than a question of being good and evil. It is like who is able to provide for you better. I think it is more like that. It is like a struggle for existence.
Thank you so much, Priti. Jemima is here. Jemima, Am I audible?
Yes,
Okay.
Priti. Uh,
So Jemima, you take
Thank
over.
you. Yes. Thank you so much, Priti, for this wonderful session. This was really so interesting and engaging. I hope our viewers too have enjoyed it a lot. Thank you for joining us. Thank you our viewers also. And I would now request Duti to now officially conclude this session and give the vote of thanks. Duti, over to you.
Thank you to all of you for giving me a chance to present over here.
I-
It has been very intimate. It has been intimidating in a certain ways because this is the first time I'm doing anything like this, and thanks a lot to all of you.
Thanks to you too, and it was really wonderful having you
Yes, yes,
here.
yes, of
It,
course.
it really was,
And such a
yes,
luminous presentation. Thank you so much.
exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, so Duti, over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Pritikana Di, for this, I don't know how, for this very vivid, giving us a vivid view of how the pandemic and the whole lockdown has affected everybody of us. And it was very, very enriching to hear you. It was good to know how things have been around uh, in different aspects of in different people's lives. Also, thank you so much for this session, for being with us today. Thank you all the audience for being with us and for this for making this session a success and for making this session a very interactive one. Thank you everybody on behalf of Team Calcutta Comparatists. Good night.
Good
Good
night,
night to
Preeti.
all.
Thank you so
Good
much.
night,
Good night to all.
everyone.
Good night,
And we
everyone. And please don't forget to subscribe our channel for further updates. And okay, we'll be giving updates
Yes.
on our social media groups. Okay,
Okay.
thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. Good night. See you.
Priti, bye bye.
Bye.